What did you make of what Stephen Marshall had to say? There could still be, a hotspot local government area approach, but it seems like he's properly signing up to the plan on 80% and not having state borders go up. What do you make of it?
Yeah, look, it looks very much like Stephen Marshall is following the National Cabinet agreed plan, which is more than I can say for some of the other states. And one of the things we don't want to have happen here is that the agreement that's been made at the national level are getting pulled apart politically. So, look, I support Stephen Marshall's views here. Of course, it's not as simple as just the 80%. We do need to consider other factors. At the end of the day, we've got 20% of the population that are left unvaccinated under the national plan. We also have to be mindful that each state may have different capacities in terms of their ability to deal with admissions into hospital for those people that are not vaccinated and that are fortunate enough to get COVID. So there needs to be some variation, but Stephen Marshall is sticking with the plan, and I think that's a good thing.
So the biggest factor, as you mentioned there, a hospital system's ability to cope. New South Wales has said it'll be stretched, but with a lot of cases it can still cope. Is when we look at South Australia's approach and even New South Wales compared to WA, is it time to call out WA and saying, well, it's not just about you saying you'll keep your citizens safe, Mark McGowan, but your hospital system can't cope with COVID. That's why you'll have to keep state borders up.
Yeah, look, I'm not completely familiar with the Western Australian health system, but I do know that here in South Australia, during the winter, we get ramping at our hospitals. And so it's very disturbing, and I'm very sensitive to this issue, which is the reason I mentioned it. Stephen Marshall has to get on top of this. It's not just people that aren't vaccinated that will be affected by this, because as our hospitals fill up with people who have COVID, it means that other people can't get treated properly. So I'm not in a position to give any sort of commentary on Western Australia's circumstance, but I am very, very cognisant of the need to look at that here in South Australia.
Right, but when it comes to comparing states, because you mentioned let's not politicise the opening up document, is it important to examine what leaders' motivations are for not committing to having relatively, as you say, not no matter the circumstance, but having open borders, that it should be sheeted back to, well, what about your job as Premier? Why can't you commit to it?
Yeah, look, I think that the national plan puts in place a reasonable foundation for states to work on. Ultimately, the Prime Minister will not have control of this. He's indicated in the Parliament that he's not going to try and exercise any sort of legal or constitutional powers in relation to what the states do. So it will be for the states. I would hope that each of them operate consistent with the national plan. Of course, we need to make sure that we don't end up opening up when New South Wales is fully reaches the 80% and other states are behind. Again, South Australia is behind other states, the eastern states, in terms of vaccination. So it will be in the hands of the premiers, and they have to act responsibly, making sure that they are both considering the health of their own state-based populations, but also the businesses that might need to interact with entities in other jurisdictions.
Yeah, then you get to the vaccine passport possibility. You've expressed some concerns in the past about forgery. What have you made of the path since then? QR codes and then being tested apparently around the world. Is this a technological solution to something where the paper might have been very easy to forge?
Look, it's been about 6 weeks since I raised the issue of forgery. It is a big concern for me. If we're going to have a vaccine passport, it must work properly. It must not be subject to forgery. Otherwise, you end up with health measures in place that aren't actually going to work. One of the problems we've got is the government, I think, is trying to overcomplicate things. I'm talking about the federal government, in effect trying to produce a COVID-safe 2.0 in circumstances where here in South Australia there is a company that has already rolled out this technology in the UK for COVID testing validation, and in places like the Netherlands. So the government's actually, the federal government's been very slow on this. There are solutions available. I think they're trying to overcomplicate it, but it has to be sorted out. If we're going to have a vaccine passport, it needs to have integrity.
Yeah, and a lot of people to access it too and have confidence in it, because we know the way the COVID Safe app went. Just finally, FOI, you're launching another legal challenge. Your issue with this essentially is timing. We've had journalists with requests in for a year, sometimes even 2 years without an answer. Transparency isn't really transparency, I guess, unless it's timely.
No, look, the government are playing games here. If you initiate an FOI, you'll get a response from a department that's not consistent with the spirit of the FOI Act, which says you can have access to everything unless there's an exemption. They give you the minimum amount they can, and then the next place you have to go is to the Independent Information Commissioner. She does a pretty good job in terms of independent decision making, but unfortunately it takes up to 2 years to get a decision. So I've actually initiated action in the federal court to challenge the reasonableness of the time frame in which she's dealing with these FOIs. Time is the enemy of FOI, it's the enemy of transparency. It undermines the entire system. At each step along the way, the government has in place a mechanism that's contrary to transparency, and that's not a good thing.
Rex Patrick, thanks for your time. We'll talk again soon.